Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room, an island show that likes to talk about the issues, the news, the views, the opinions, all from a local angle. I'm Robin Adair, and across town, my co-host with the most, the Croatian sensation himself. And John, some big debates taking place recently, and a lot of the issues have been surrounding things like censorship.
Censorship, free speech, what we can say, when we can say it, how we can say it, who we piss off when we say it. All of this is center of so many debates, and sort of pressing this issue is a fellow named Jordan Peterson, who arrived in Victoria recently, speak to a packed audience. He's a psychologist, author, media commentator, who often raises the hackles, angers, annoys people of the so-called progressive or woke movements in society. These folks did not want him to come to Vancouver Island.
That's true, John. And some of these people came from the University of Victoria. They were activist students who were very unhappy about Jordan Peterson's arrival and opportunity to speak at the Save on Food Center. They wanted the arena closed. They wanted them to cancel that event. And they even held an alternative event on campus, and certainly made their feelings felt. And, you know, he has detractors for sure, Jordan Peterson. He came, one of the major things he talked about was empowerment, and he was talking about psychology and about how people need to go for the things that are important in life. So in that respect, he wasn't controversial. Came to the Q&A, and really it came down to questions about things like identifying young people at a very early age about their gender, he, she, they, all these sorts of things. And Jordan Peterson doesn't like to see it done at too young an age. That's controversial. He also has some views that people don't necessarily like about the overreaching of government during the pandemic and the way that the mandates were administered. He's not anti-vaccination per se. He just feels government overextended itself. That's controversial. So fair enough. Students from UVIC were demanding that they shut him down, but you know what? He came just the same.
So you managed to wend your way through the hordes of screaming protesters outside? Actually, they were kind of a creative bunch. I guess they decorated the sidewalks out there, and they're selling tickets to their counter event, which I thought was a nice capitalist twist on the whole woke nightmare.
Robin, the arena was nearly full, and a lot of younger people filled the stands. Let me just repeat that. A lot of younger people in their 20s, 30s, 40s. I mean, you know. And, you know, Robin, we weren't there. We heard from several folks about exactly what was happening in there. And the audience filled the stands to hear a message that mainly focused on living a fulfilled life. After all, Jordan is a psychologist. So Peterson's call to action was pick one thing and go for it. Again, not so bad advice. It was not the fire and brimstone right-wing rant I suspect we all expected, but rather a call for everyone to be their best selves. Not a bad message. And that message won a lot of support.
I think that's true. Along with that message, there was some talk of politics. He says Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party, has a lot to learn. Didn't fully endorse him, says he has a lot to learn, whatever that means exactly. And he was much more unequivocal about Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister, just saying that he lies. He says he wasn't flattering. He says he lies a lot. And he was scathing in his message. And, you know, a recent event doesn't really help in terms of the image that Justin Trudeau sometimes projects. This past week, our prime minister was lecturing the Italian prime minister on gay rights. And for this, Italian newspapers pulled out photos of Trudeau in his blackface back in his school teaching days, wondering about his credibility in throwing rocks at other countries. And, here's what I really have to say about Jordan Peterson and this whole issue. We live in a democracy. That means that people should and need to have the right to express themselves. Neither left nor right have a monopoly on the truth. And they simply need to understand that everyone has their own lens about what's right and wrong, and we can learn from others. Now, I don't agree with everything Jordan Peterson says by any means, but it's his opinion. I don't agree with everything that David Suzuki thinks, or Sephora Berman, or Naomi Klein, but they too have every right to express their opinion. People need to listen to different points of view in order to learn. And the last people in the world who should be attacking this right to hear other contrary opinions, in my opinion, are university students and university faculty. Because let's face it, freedom of speech is a cornerstone of our modern education system. They should remember that. And that's all I have to say about that for the moment. John, let's now shift to the economy.
Robin, let me first say, let's just sort of comment on your, what I think, outstanding opinion. You and I both live in a free society. We know that. We appreciate it. We honor it. And we talk about it all the time on the Rumble Room. We both hold liberal views when it comes to social issues, whatever liberal is these days, whatever conservative is these days. But we both are quite vehemently against the fact of folks trying to stop free speech. Okay. Not hate speech. That's another. Free speech. We live in a country where you're allowed to say stuff. And that's where we and I take exception to a criticism of a man coming and expressing his opinion. Anyway, it's now time to discuss the economy and where our community and country is heading in regards to our savings, employment, future development. David Schneider is a Victoria financial advisor who's been managing millions of investor dollars through these turbulent economic and frankly health times. Let's zoom him in. David, great to see you again.
Good to see you guys.
What a great interview we had with you a while back. Lots of comments, lots of interest. We had to have you back. So let's get right into it. We keep hearing about banks in trouble in the US and rising interest rates that at least don't seem to be stopping yet. At the same time, government here in Canada is continuing to spend lots of money, creating huge deficits,
Right.
apparently to keep everything afloat. Is this all part of the COVID recovery or maybe something else? Is ideology getting in the way of business?
Well, I don't think any bank, no matter who you are, whether it's the Royal Bank or regional in California, can deal as quickly with a 500 basis point increase in interest rates over 14 months. It's not set up. You can't change your portfolio, your assets to align with that. So naturally, a bunch of banks got in trouble. We're very fortunate here in Canada that the Canadian banks, especially the big six, have an incredibly diversified deposit base and funding base. And plus, our regulatory framework in Canada helps us tremendously during tough times, and it did so back in 2008. That's why we didn't have anywhere close to the issues.
What about the factors in all of this? I mean, we keep hearing COVID being blamed by politicians, especially as they continue to spend so much money. And we also hear the Ukrainian war is a factor. We hear that China's market instability is a factor. We hear high interest rates. We hear all these different things. In your mind, I mean, what is causing the market to be kind of rocky, and everybody keeps talking about the potential for another recession?
Well, they spent so much money, especially in North America on COVID. They shut things down. So naturally, we're going to have an inflation shock because they shut everything down and we had supply chain issues. It's crazy. They cut everything down and then they talk about job creation when they reopen things back up. something I think the Fraser Institute came out with a report about 6 months ago. 84% of the new jobs were government related. Like, an economy can't last that way. It's scary how much money is spent, especially here in Canada on a percentage basis. It can't continue. That's one of the issues that we have with respect to the inflation problems. We have an employment issues in Canada. Well, so much of the employment is government. And look at the nice job package they just got with the latest unrest that they had. And they all got $2,500 bonuses too while they were on strike. It's pretty scary. And there's still not the pushback in Canada against all this government spending. It alarms a lot of us. It's got to get under control. But as gentlemen, you see, that's not changing in BC right now. It's sure not changing in Ottawa right now. And that's one of the issues why inflation is so-called sticky. We have an employment issue. There's just not enough people to work.
Let's shift gears a little bit, you and I.
Yeah.
Let's shift from the chessboard to the international board.
Right.
And let's talk about China. Who isn't talking about China? I understand your firm will be soon hosting an economic expert to discuss the Chinese economy, which of course now is one of the top economies, if not the top in the world. What's your take on China as a world economic engine? We've had poor diplomatic relationships now for some time. Does this make it all harder to do business with that superpower economic engine?
It's a superpower, but bottom line, people I listen to a lot, China needs the United States and the United States needs China. They trade back and forth, but China's evolving. It's navigating from to a middle class to a consumption market. They're also navigating the fact that deglobalization's happening now, where so much of the production facilities in China is moving out. Mexico's a big beneficiary. United States is trying to get some back. They're going through a transition right now. They're going through an interesting transition, but they're a country that was not rich on a general, like Japan 20, 30 years ago. Japan was rich, but China was not. And now they're all going through this huge demographic blow up. And it has huge ramifications to these countries, especially China, and they realize it. So they have a lot of challenges. But every time they think there's going to be a big war going on, there's just no way for the United States to operate without China, and vice versa. They'll always try to figure it out. But you see a lot of saber rattling right now in Taiwan.
Well, that's all good news. That's good news. I was talking to an associate of mine who I hadn't seen for a few years. He works with the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers.
Right.
They're based in Calgary. And, he was explaining to me again how valuable our energy exports are to the overall economy. He says the government, especially the federal government these days, really kind of keeps arm's length from saying very much that's good about our energy exports. And they keep talking about moving away from fossil fuels and moving to other forms of energy. But he said that our exports of energy at the moment, and he's talking about liquefied natural gas and oil, is 5 times bigger. It's 5 times bigger than the next biggest export that comes out of Canada. In other words, it's a behemoth. It's huge. And, there's been this huge demand because Russia's had to curtail their exports because of this war. Canada has been very slow off the mark on exporting natural gas and liquefied natural gas. I mean, I am concerned, and I'm sure you must be, and investors must be, that we're missing a big opportunity.
We're missing a big opportunity, but again, let's go back to the government. The government makes all decisions, and so many of their decisions are based on polls. And one thing's nice about you gentlemen doing this podcast in little old Victoria, Canadians got to be better educated. It astounds me how little they know outside of their community, outside of their little bubble. And the polls in Ottawa show that they can get their 33% of the voting and control Parliament. And there's still this overwhelming thing that we don't need fossil fuels. Well, it's not working. So one thing I'll lead to, and one of my network is a bunch of senior people that are connected to Washington and the Fed, and they were so helpful. And about 3-4 months ago, it was quite obvious that in Washington, behind closed doors, they realized that this energy transition isn't going to work that quickly. It's not going to work at all like what people think. It's fairyland. And they made a huge strategic move, and you saw their lack or stop of attacking the energy companies in the United States. And the reason they do that is that the energy companies are home to innovation. If there's any area where we're going to get innovation to work on hydrogen, to be on carbon capture, to work on other efficient things, it's out of the technology expertise of the big energy companies. They're going to lead it. So don't kill them. So that's why you're starting to see huge incentives, and that's why Biden came out with his big act that right now Trudeau's trying to figure out, where they provide incredible incentives on the technology advances in the renewable side. They know it's not going to happen overnight, but they realize they're not going to attack the oil industries because they got to make money to pay for all this. Right now in Calgary, there's a boom going on, not so much that oil stocks are going up and they have so much, they're going to be hiring more people. They're efficient. What they are doing is that they are the epicenter in Canada to deal with the efficiency and the new ideas with what's happening with renewable. It's all coming out of downtown Calgary and a bit out of Edmonton, and it's huge. That's why their economy is taking off so much.
This leads really nicely into my final question.
What's
and
that?
Of course, and of course, why you're paid the big bucks, and that
Not
is
like
forecasting.
Not like a backup short spot for the Blue Jays. Anyway, go ahead.
And forecasting and looking in the future, and here you have been doing that for us for the better part of the interview. So let's start to get your opinion on some of these questions. When will inflation stop? Will housing prices eventually level off, maybe even go lower? How about the cost of food and services, inflation? What does prosperity look like for us in the future? That's just a little. That's a lot of stuff to throw at you. But where are you coming from these days?
Well, you don't look at really the stock market. You look at inflation. You look at the bond market. The 2-year has gone from 5 to 3.70. The bond market's showing that things are slowing down. We are seeing a tremendous slowdown in all aspects. So many lagging indicators. It sometimes takes 12 to 14 months before an impact of these higher interest rates are really kicked in. We're seeing interest rates starting to drop everywhere. The bond market is showing that we're starting to see a slowdown. You're seeing some of the layoffs. We still have that challenge where the government keeps spending and hiring everybody around, but there's just not many people around. So we are seeing some really good decreases. We're seeing the supply chain issues being taken care of. There are some challenges with food, but it's taking care of itself. You say, look at, then the government gets involved, like in Europe, where they all of a sudden they tell farmers they can't use fertilizer anymore. That that hurts the food crops. But we're starting to see a significant slowdown. We're seeing the analysts that I have a lot of time for and strategists are looking maybe 2 to 3 rate cuts over the balance of 2023. The bond market is actually saying that. That will help, especially the real estate market. And the reality here in Victoria, most of your viewers are in Victoria, we are becoming a global city. Vancouver and Toronto, they became global cities, and with it, they became expensive. I can't afford to live in Singapore. I can't afford to live in Paris. Victoria, unfortunately, is becoming very expensive. And the challenges with housing, governments get involved from the standpoint of restriction on building. They tax the heck out of, I heard last week that building costs locally, residential is about $450 a foot here, and it was about $280 a foot in Calgary. There must be something wrong in Victoria. I know it's more expensive, but is it really that much? So it's from a prosperity standpoint, I do try to advise if there's any way for people to get a foothold in the real estate market, somehow owning a property, government will never take it. Government will never go after that principal resident tax exempt status. That's how wealth is really created, is owning real estate. I think it's going to be a great long-term investment, especially here on the island, anywhere. But the nice thing about it, you're seeing interest rates finally subside. You're starting to realize that governments are starting to get some common sense, because it just doesn't work the way things are doing. So I think cooler heads will prevail, but I'm actually quite positive. And I have to say to the young viewers out there, there is never a better time right now to start a career, to work hard, to get ahead than now, because there's just a shortage of good young people that want to work their butts off and really get ahead. And those that really have a common sense and good work ethics. I tell young people, there's never been a better opportunity to get ahead right now, especially here in Victoria, where there's a shortage of young people.
Absolutely. Final question from me. You were saying the economy's slowing, and we all can see evidence of that in different facets of the economy. But often what happens is, as the economy slows, the market responds in a different way, because the market's always looking at what comes next as opposed to what's right in front of us. What's your crystal ball telling us about the stock market? I mean, will this be a shallow recession if we have a recession? Are we moving towards better times in the near future? You indicated that things are looking more promising with our energy sector. Will other sectors follow?
Yeah, I see a change in attitude in Ottawa this past week. Another group to really listen to and read is Doomberg. They write incredible pieces, and they did a follow-up piece on the nuclear energy side. Ottawa's just done a 360 on nuclear energy, looking at supporting it. You could not get that out a couple of years ago. I see a good upside in the market. I see a real change in attitude. Canada cannot be just by themselves. You see what's happening in the United States, and they're changing their tune on energy, on supporting it. And then you look at you look at what the world did getting through COVID, and still persevering. Despite governments closing down economies more than what they ever should, and yeah, it was a pullback, but we bounced back, and then we underestimate the level of innovation and just incredible ideas that come out of whether it's Silicon Valley, all the stuff that's happening in the renewable space. It's fascinating how we underestimate the human spirit, the creativity out there, the innovation.
It's great to have a keen financial mind like David Schneider in the Rumble Room. Can't wait to talk to him again, maybe in the fall. We'll look forward to having him see what happens. All kinds of economic developments going on in the world, the war in Ukraine, the debt limit activity in the U.S. So there'll be lots to talk about with David later on in the year. But before we go and wrap up this very interesting show, a little viewer mail. You'll recall we spoke to former Mayor Stu Young of Langford about the massive 12.4% hike in that community, which he suggested came from the new inexperienced council, which defeated him. Well, this didn't pass without at least one letter that we're going to quote from one of our viewers.
That's right, John. We did hear from Stacy, and she writes, how does Stu explain the lack of infrastructure like health, police, fire, and ambulance service? Now we have more people as a result of crazy development, and there's no infrastructure. So, there's always a yin and yang with these issues, especially when it comes to politics. And again, we appreciate hearing from our viewers. And on that happy note, John, it's about time to say goodbye.
It is. And what you and I support, whether it's good mail or bad mail, in our opinion, is people's right to write mail to us about what they want. We had a great show today and really appreciate some of these tough questions that we're, rumbling about. So again, if you're interested in hearing our viewpoints, other viewpoints, our speaker viewpoints, you can follow us. Facebook is our heart and soul. TikTok is another way to hear about the Rumble Room and all its opinions. We have YouTube, of course, which houses all of the videos. There are also Facebook news groups that we hang out on. So people are commenting all over the place, including Instagram and TikTok. So with all of that being said, I'm grateful that I live in a free society where, Robin, I can say whatever the hell I want. And for that, I am John Jurisic.
And you know, I have the right to say, and I believe this, I have the right to say I'm Robin Adair, and rumble on!